Distinguished guests, our session will start in a few minutes.
España es aire, aire y sol. 1, 2, 3, 30, 300 días de sol al año. Y campos y mares. Y un ancho océano. España es tierra de molinos que doman el viento. Desde siempre, nación de viento, sol, de tierra ancha y aguas profundas. Un país de energía inagotable que apuesta por desplegar sus recursos naturales para acelerar la transición ecológica y crecer de forma sostenible y descarbonizada gracias a ese potencial privilegiado. Somos el octavo país con mayor potencia renovable instalada y el segundo en Europa. Casi la mitad de la generación eléctrica nacional ya es renovable. Un sector con más de 111.000 empleos que se triplicarán en esta década. Y ya somos el 10º mercado más atractivo en el mundo para inversiones en energía verde. En el nuevo modelo energético que destierra los combustibles fósiles, el ciudadano se erige en actor principal. En España el autoconsumo se ha multiplicado por 10 desde 2017 y el mapa de las comunidades energéticas crece cada día. España ha situado el clima y la energía en el centro de una transformación integral para lograr la neutralidad climática en 2050. Una economía de bajas emisiones competitiva y eficiente que asegure la soberanía energética con recursos limpios y propios y garantice la protección de los hogares. Esta transición debe ser justa con las personas y los territorios. La premisa es no dejar a nadie atrás, creando alternativas innovadoras, manteniendo el empleo y la población con inversiones ligadas a la economía verde, con diálogo y participación ciudadana. En este camino a la descarbonización, Spirec 23 arranca como foro para crear sinergias y sumar voces de alto nivel al debate de cómo encajar las piezas en el diseño del futuro energético, para ahondar juntos en este reto común con un diálogo constructivo y pleno de aciertos. El mundo nos está mirando.
Buenos días.
Good morning. We're going to resume the first session of the third day of Spirec. The next session is entitled Energy and Industrial Policies to Mainstream Renewables, and the panel is chaired over by Joan Groizard.
Sentémonos, bueno, da igual. Muy buenos días. Muy buenos
A very
días.
good morning.
Very good morning to all. Solo un comentario para los compañeros de sonido. No sé si
Comment
hemos respetado
for
estrictamente
the
el
sound
orden
team. I'm
de
not really
sonido,
sure
pero
where
haremos
we
lo
have
posible.
done
Muchísimas
the right
Good morning, dear
stuff
friends, colleagues.
for sound, but
Welcome
everything's
to the
good.
third and final day of SPIREC 2023, this International Renewable Energy Conference, which we are very proud to have hosted between REN21 and the Spanish government. This high-level session today, this plenary session this morning, as you know, we'll be focusing on industrial and energy policies and the interactions and the synergies between both of them. This session touches on a lot of the main topics that have been addressed throughout the whole of SPIREC 2023 and touches upon a lot of the key issues, the key pillars, the main threads running through the whole program. It's obvious that there is no energy transition without industry. We need the right technical solutions, we need the right industrial solutions, we need renewable energy, energy efficiency, electrification, and that needs to go, obviously, that requires industrial activity. But at the same time, I think we've learned in the last few years that there's also no industry without energy transition. Fossil fuel dependency, volatile fossil fuel prices, international dependence of different commodities. I think we've seen, especially in Europe, but also worldwide, that energy prices have been absolutely key to the competitiveness of the industrial sector. We have seen a very marked reduction in industrial activity in Europe. Spain is one example, but Germany, France, other very heavily industrial countries in Spain, in Europe, have suffered from high energy prices, and we have learned, and I think it's clear, that energy transition is key for competitiveness. At the same time, the energy transition of the industrial sector is not trivial. The industrial sector is characterized for having a very high energy footprint, especially very high temperatures, difficulty for electrification, very complex context, and it's not unusual that the industrial sector is usually defined as one of those that is hard to abate when we talk about climate mitigation. And at the same time, touching on other topics that have been addressed in this conference so far, the industrial and the energy policy interlinks touch very heavily on social and the economic dimension as well. We need an energy transition that works for people, as the tagline for this SPIREC highlights. And when we talk about industry, we talk about jobs, we talk about livelihoods, we talk about goods and services, economic activity that we need for well-being for our everyday lives. And at the same time, one of the topics that was addressed mostly in the first session, in the first day, strategic autonomy. For the continuity of the industrial activity itself, to reduce the vulnerability of the industrial sector to international dependencies or to long supply chains, we have seen that the importance of trying to bring back or trying to regionalize or trying to address, in any case, the international dependencies that our industrial sector depends on. We've seen that countries might want to build their way into energy security by reinforcing their industrial capabilities around the energy transition, but that brings a debate, or that might bring a tension in an international, a global market of goods and services. We are so very many different issues, many different hues that we like to touch on in the debate this morning. In order to be able to debate these issues, we have a very diverse panel this morning. We are privileged to have very key speakers from the public, the private, the institutional sectors, which will provide us with a very global idea of the topic we're discussing. Starting perhaps with the private sector, we are privileged to have with us Céline Remonet. She is the Secretary General of Western Europe and Overseas of Akuo Energy. Akuo Energy is an independent producer and developer of renewable energy, which is active across the entire value chain, which provides very good insight of the different issues we are debating today. Continuing in the private sector, 2 seats over, we have with us José Donoso. He is the chairman of the Global Solar Council, representing the World Photovoltaic Energy Association, representing obviously the industry, which is obviously a key player in this interface, in this overlap between energy and industrial policy. Thinking about the institutional side, we have with us Ali ZEROUALI. He is the head of cooperation and international development of MASEN, the Moroccan Agency for Sustainable Energy, which is the group responsible for carrying out the renewable energy strategy of Morocco in the last decade. We have with us as well RAMÓN MENDEZ GALAIN, who has had a background as Secretary of Energy of Uruguay during 2 different administrations, and he is currently leading Asociación IDAE, the Latin American non-profit organization working on the sustainable transition in the region. So again, very good overlap and very good regional vision here. We also have with us CIYONG, Deputy to the Director General and Managing Director of Technical Cooperation at UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, working on guiding country and regional strategic engagements, working on partnerships with financial institutions, business sector. So again, a very good overlap of the issues we are trying to address. And then providing a very critical multi-stakeholder approach, multi-stakeholder perspective. We are lucky to have with us RANA ADIB, Executive Director of RAN21, and as you know, one of the co-hosts of SPIREC. So to start off the session this morning, again, the issue of this session is the overlap between industrial and energy policy. So the first question that I would like to pose to our speakers today is, what is the point of that overlap? To what point are energy and industry aligned? Are they two sides of the same coin, or are they two competing forces? And what are the opportunities we can take out of this? So perhaps, Celine, we can start with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Joan. I think that energy and industrial policies, they need to move forward together. We see that things are moving at all levels, international, European, national and local levels. That's key, I think, for the private sector, and ACU as an IPP is a good example of that, that we need a clear and long-term visibility on industrial policies for the development and acceleration of renewable energy. That's key. And we particularly need a national engagement, national, local regulation, so that actors as ACU know where they can go and how they can go, and work hand in hand. I think that's one of the key points. We need to work hand in hand with local authorities, national authorities, public institutions, to co-develop the framework and the regulation in which we will be able to accelerate energy transition. I think two good examples of industrial policies that need clearly to be quickly developed now is a better access to the grid. We know when we are developing projects that's a key issue, and in many countries where we are, ACU and other actors, that's a big issue. So I think we need to think and to find solutions for that. You were talking about finding the right technical solutions. Another example, another issue would be to work on the storage solutions. ACU has developed some of these solutions this past year, and I think that would be another technical solution to develop energy and to help the acceleration of renewables.
Thank you very much, Celine. I think we'll go this way around the table. So, Anna, over to you next.
So I guess I'll build on one of the example or one of your messages. You said there is no industry without the energy transition. I think the first part is there is no industry without energy. And I think that is something which is really important to see. So when we are speaking about the industrial policies, coming from the renewable side, we often think about the industrial policies for building up, obviously, the renewable energy industry. But we have heard during many sessions that it's about the whole economic part. And and I think that's also where there is so much of the effort or focus these days on energy security and sovereignty. What is, I think, really important is to take this opportunity to position renewable energy as a short-term answer already, because the industry, so I fully agree, the long-term perspective is very, very important. Where are we heading? But we also need to see and acknowledge that renewable energy today and installing today heat pumps, installing PV system, even in social housing, is actually a short-term solution that paves the way for the industry. So that's one part I would like to mention. And then the other one is, I think we need to think about what industry do we want. The reality is, and this brings in a question also of pricing of the energy. We are still spending high amounts and high shares of our global GDP for subsidies on fossil fuel. And we also know from the industry sector that the renewables as a least cost option is indeed something that is a reality. But we also need to acknowledge that very often it is about building up new industries and manufacturing capacities. And in this sense, the question probably is, shouldn't we basically include in the pricing the cost of fossil fuel to society and to the environment, but also the value of renewable energy as something that is beneficial. And this is something that certainly allows to shift it. And the third part, and I think this is something we've heard a lot here, when we're speaking about energy security, for some regions, actually, this is energy access. And for those regions, it's not about industrialization as a re-industrialization or changing the industry, but building up the industry and local value creation and economic opportunities. And I think those are some tensions we need to address, but probably really step back more as what economy and what industry do we want to have.
Thank you very much. I think a very interesting issue there when we were debating at the European level at least about how to react in the very, very short term to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And some voices were saying, renewable energy, sure, that's the long-term solution. But I think a lot of the debates that came up is, no, in fact, in a lot of cases, in a lot of industries, renewable energy is the short-term solution as well. So I think that's a very critical point to remember there as well. Over to the next speaker, José Donoso.
Bien, me habéis dicho que puedo hablar español.
You told me that I could speak Spanish. Well, I believe that energy policy and industrial policy have always gone hand in hand. Industrialization was born, and it didn't happen by chance, when the steam engine is used, and when we see this, we see that industrialization and energy have been extremely related, and with renewables, it's also going to be the case. It couldn't be any other way. I think that there are two important links, one direct one and one indirect one. Renewables are disruptive, and most particularly photovoltaic, and in many, many aspects. But one of the aspects, and please remember where it's important, it's industrial policy. In the electric energy industry, we had combined cycle energy, and with the nuclear energy, there was a huge control of technology, with very few countries in the world that had the ability to control the technologies to produce energy. They were very complicated, intensive in work, and with very few countries controlling that technology. However, the disruptive nature of photovoltaic energy is that it's simple, easy to use, and that any country can produce. Therefore, the effect of being able to have your own industry, develop your own industrial process, and have your own elements, panels, followers, structures to build the industry is disseminated worldwide. So the technological dependency feature of the past disappears. At the same time, technological freedom goes hand in hand with something else. Until now, it was important to control the parts of the world where coal was being produced first, afterwards oil, but there's oil, sun and wind everywhere. So we break away with the dependency and ties with producing countries. Now what's important is that you have the technology and have a good resource. Countries with good resources have a huge opportunity ahead of them because they can become competitive. Countries who, from an energy standpoint, weren't competitive, like our country, Spain, are now, with good sun and good territory for an energy that is not source that's not complex and which has access, where everybody can produce electric energy in a much cheaper way than other countries who are far more competitive than us. And therefore, you change the situation. So the renewables are going to have an impact that are going to lead to reindustrialization or sharing out industrialization in a different and positive way. In fact, we're already seeing this happen in Spain. As I said before, next week, they're going to build a factory of artificial diamonds here because there's a photovoltaic energy plant nearby that can provide energy at a sustainable price and non-stop. So this is one of the advantages. And what's important is not to add barriers to the possibilities of industrialization that arise from renewables. For example, in this plant, self-consumption is a formula that is going to allow industries and different companies to reduce their energy costs. So energy and industrialization are going to go hand in hand as they have usually done, but now with new rules of the game and definitely new possibilities.
Binomium of energy and industrial policy having to be totally aligned. From the experience of the UN Industrial Development Organization, I guess energy is one of the very important issues you are addressing. So, CIYONG, over to you.
Thank you, Moderator. From my side, just several quick points on the questions just raised about the synergies, the linkage between energy policy and industrial policy. And the first, I think it's important to recognize the extreme role of policy in this field, because when you talk about the energy transition, if you look at the history of energy development, from wood to then coal, then to fossil fuel, oil and gas. This took a very long time, gradually, mainly due to economic and technology, this kind of advancement, or economic reasons. Now, for all current transition from conventional fossil fuel to this no carbon or zero emission, this energy, renewables, then basically this is mainly, I think, political and policy-driven process. That's why when you talk about the Paris ambition, yeah, we need to have the urgency. We always worry about the speed, the pace, the scale. We cannot really to reach that point. So that's why we need now most impactful policy to be developed and implemented, not only for energy, also for industrial sector. So I see that, particularly from this point of view, that the subject today we discussed is very relevant in the context of this energy transition. Secondly, I think now why I think we talk about the synergies and the linkage between energy policy and that policy. Always in government, then these nine ministries, they do not talk to each other. They develop their own, like energy administration and the Ministry of Industry. They just focus on their area. They rarely the case talk to each other. So for UNIDO, we promote that this kind of integral approach to support the industrial development through partnership for country partnership. Basically, set up this mechanism for intergovernment collaboration to support industrial development from an energy, sustainable energy perspective, from also environmental protection perspective, very effective. We have already 12 these programs across the world. Thirdly, I think it's important that for the policy, energy policy and to address both the supply side and the demand side. We need to create a market. No, market is not naturally developed under the current constants, in particular in developing countries. We need really to establish the market fundamentals. Then basically to provide the right incentives then for the market players to play their role. But at the initial stage, government need to really then they provide this guidance, also incentives. This is really extremely important. At some point, you need to also withdraw. When market is mature enough, then let the market forces to play its role. Finally, I think for international organizations like UNIDO, we also have a role to play to promote good practices in this ground. Yeah, basically to have this organized multilateral energy policy forum to encourage peer learning, particularly from developing countries, how they really could build into their kind of policy-making process that this kind of dimension of synergies. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lots of linkages there between the roles of the public and the private sector, demand and supply side, getting the financing right, and obviously, again, consensus on the importance of addressing industrial and energy policy in an aligned way. Moving over on the table, Jose was mentioning some of the issues in Spain, which I'm absolutely sure are very common to issues on the other side of the Mediterranean in the case of Morocco. But Ali, over to you. What are the linkages or the importance between the energy and the industrial policy?
Thank you, Juan. So for me, I think that these two parts, the energy and the industry, go hand in hand, and we cannot separate them. I would like to recall maybe a figure that was mentioned by President Pedro Sanchez yesterday, and for me that is very shocking and very important, is that 8 of 10 countries are importing oil or gas, so they are dependent on their energy imports. Now, if you go towards the energy transition, and we just move the figures from being dependent of importing oil and gas to import components and finished products like blades, wind components, solar panels, etc., it won't change the picture for the country. So the country will remain dependent on its imports, even if it goes, or the country goes towards the energy transition. That will, of course, helps the country to decrease the emission of carbon, to mitigate also the variability of the energy price. But at the end, the country won't capture all the added value and the benefits that they could capture from the energy transition. So this is something that is very important. And if a country misses the local content development and the industrial integration, I think that the country will miss more than 50% of the added value. So Morocco is trying to develop very heavily the local content. So we have reached around 45% in terms of local content for the solar value chain. For the wind value chain, we have even overpassed 70%. And we have announced many factories relating to battery, the battery industry, but also electrolyzers for green hydrogen. So there is a trend that is going on in order to enhance and develop further the local content. What is very important also to know and to analyze, just when we want to identify what are the opportunities in terms of industrial development, is to separate between the upstream industry integration, the energy value chain, specifically all the EPCs, the works that are relating to the development directly of the renewable farms and so on, and then the downstream part of the value chain. And for all these 3 parts of the value chain, there are different opportunities and there are different means that needs to be implemented in order to benefit from them.
Thank you very much, Ali. So a lot on there on the spillover effects and the value added that a country can capture through exploiting the energy transition as an opportunity. And I think that's an experience that can resonate in the case of Uruguay. En el caso de Uruguay, tenéis la experiencia de haber hecho.
In the case of Uruguay, you have done quite an important part of the energy transition. Maybe not all of it, but you've done so. So what are the lessons learned? That's a very important part of the energy transition, isn't it?
Thank you, John. In fact, I think there are 2 sides of the same coin concerning the link between energy and industry. The first part of the coin, the first side is which is the relation between the energy industry and the transition itself, which means how one contributes to the other. And the other side is how a decarbonized mix contributes to the general deployment of the industry in the country and the development of the country itself. So concerning the first part, concerning my country, perhaps I have to say that we have in a way, already done our energy transition because we are 97–98% of renewables in the power mix and more than 67–68% in the global primary mix for all kinds of energies. And which is more interesting, that in the power sector, we have more than 50% coming from intermittent sources like wind and solar. And the relation between industry and this process was very deep from the very beginning. From the first side of the coin, yes, we have a huge impact on the local content during the transition. We had created 50,000 jobs. 50,000 jobs for a small country like Uruguay with only 3 million inhabitants is huge. It's something like 3% of the total force power of the country. And the spillover over the economy of the transition was something like 4% of GDP, $2 billion for a small size economy, $50 billion economy, which is in my case. So we work together, the energy and the industry policies, and this allows us to have such a high impact on the energy sector. And now there are local companies that have learned in this process and now exporting knowledge to the whole region, working in more than 10 countries now in the region. On the other side of the coin, this transition already is having a huge impact on the development of the whole industry in the country and the development of the country itself, because when you have a mix which is almost independent on fossil fuel, then the cost of the energy is absolutely fixed because it's linked to long-term contracts where there's no energy commodity over there. And on the other side, we have no difficulty in security because we depend only on our own energetics, which are free, of course. So, in fact, in Uruguay, we haven't seen the effect of the war because energy is not a problem, it's not a difficulty, and the cost is fixed. And this, of course, is crucial for the development of the country and development of the whole industry in the country.
Muchas gracias, Ramón. CIYONG, I would like to come over to you because a lot of the speakers were talking about the opportunities for the industrial sector of energy, well, obviously energy, but the energy transition in particular. For example, RANA mentioned earlier how renewable energy can already be a short-term, readily available solution for the industrial sector. But obviously the industrial sector is not always made up of what we think as energy players. Industrials are thinking about their own products, their own value chains, their own solutions. So as, I guess, an energy community thinking about us, how can we help, how can we support the industrial sector itself to make the right decisions? How do we get the person in the steel sector, the paper sector, the manufacturing sector, make the right strategic decisions to play in favor of renewable energy? So what would be the idea from UNIDO in terms of how we support the industrial sector in making those decisions to promote renewable energy in their own sector?
Thank you. This is really a good question, dear to me. I think from industrial sector's perspective, always, as I think the day one discussions, private sector's representative always voice that competitiveness and this kind of viable business model. If they do not see that this is profitable, then definitely they will not go for that way. Yeah? So for us, then we need to take a whole of society approach, not only industrial sector's practice. We need to really first from the government's perspective, create a clear, predictable operation environment. Let the private industrial sector know this is the direction, the guideline government set. We need to meet as a country, as a world together, based on the commitment to Paris, this target. And of course, then signals to the market, to industrial sector, from the access to financing. If you really could, say, provide these incentives, the bank basically to incorporate this environmental dimension into this evaluation of non-application. Yeah, this is one. Secondly, also that this technology side, then this also then so subsidies also to the R&D and the innovations to make these technologies, say, affordable, yeah, not that expensive. Not only in developed countries, or mostly importantly in developed countries. Then the developed countries are willing to do this kind of transition, but they do not have means. I had a good discussion with colleagues from Morocco, really. Then another important that is capacity building. They may wish to do that, but they do not have the capacity. Yeah? They do not know how. The industrial sector needs this capacity building really to help them from for those startups. Then for those maybe have well business kind of plan, but not able to get financing. We need to help them to scale up their investment. But most importantly, also from consumer perspective, we need to encourage this kind of like behavior change, not only from private individuals, also government through green procurement. Like for UNIDO, that we encourage this kind of practice on, say, producing no emission or no carbon steels and cement. This is, I think, important for infrastructure development, in particular in developing countries. Yeah, finally, I think this is also important that we need to really have this kind of platform to promote always this kind of, say peer learning. Then the business sector, industry sector, they need to look to others, what others are doing, then how they make the business profitable. I think this is, maybe some point to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In 2 questions, Sam, I'll go over to RANA about how do we look about what everyone else is doing and what that means for ourselves. But our colleagues from Morocco and Uruguay were mentioning, and some of the other speakers, about the opportunities, I guess, nationally or regionally in terms of local content, the opportunities of the energy transition. But I want to hear the opinion of the Global Solar Council. We're talking about the opportunities of local content, of local value chains. At the same time, we've heard from CIYONG of the importance of competitiveness, and maybe that's linked sometimes to specialization and finding the best and the cheapest and the most efficient way of doing things. So, Jose, from the perspective of the Global Solar Council, is there a tension between, I guess, a regional, a local, industrial approach and competitiveness of the sector, of the energy transition as a whole? Or are they compatible, and is there a way to do the two at the same time?
I think this is the big challenge. We have in a new world, after COVID, after Ukrainian war, we have in a really new world, after all these black swans. Before COVID, we were very happy with globalization in our sector. There are some countries that could be very competitive with that producing PV panels that could be very good for the other countries that can produce electricity, cheaper electricity. But after COVID, we discovered that this perfect world of globalization has its limitations. And maybe this season of black swan is finished, maybe it's not, we don't know. But we must be ready. We need to learn from this experience and to be ready for the future, for possible, unpredictable new black swans. And in case we consider it's necessary to think in that we need to install manufacturing units in all the areas of the world, in the way that the new black swans will be difficult, that this new black swan interrupt the ecological transition process. That is key for the future of the planet. But the challenge is to do that without to finish in the autarky, because we need, how would you say, competitiveness. It will be absurd if every country produces his panels inexpensive and costly. That will not be sustainable. And at the end of the day, we have the experience in our country in the past, unfortunately, will not be sustainable economy, and then these projects will not survive. We need to do, and what is the key for that? Okay, we need some subsidies in the first moment, but we can build up a manufacturing sector thinking that always will be subsidized. That will be a big mistake. We need to point in research, development, and in innovation. Innovation is the key. The project will be, we need a geographical decentralization of the production, but based in competitiveness and innovation. That will assure the countries that they will, the people that will invest in these manufacturing units, that they will survive in the future. And that will be good for everybody, because innovation will do that this innovation will circulate in all the areas if we do more effort in this line. For me, this is the key. We must understand that we are in a new world. And as in the past, we spoke about strategic reserves of oil Now we need to speak about technological strategic reserve, that is not accumulate panels or windmill, is to have the capacity to build up a strategic amount of PV in every geographic area.
So thinking about that global perspective is exactly, and it helps me link onto this question that I wanted to ask RANA in this case. So indeed, every region, every country has the responsibility to be as secure, as safe as possible, to figure out the best way to move forward in an insecure or uncertain world, certainly. So how do we build a just transition globally if everyone is trying to do what's best for them? Is there a win-win that it works for everyone?
There should be a win-win, but this, see, I always refer to this like the energy monopoly. And you need to define the rules of the game. And the reality is that the rules of the game in a not globalized, but a deglobalized or a regionalized world with a regional source that is available everywhere, but with technology and manufacturing capacity that are not aware or existing everywhere, at least for now. And also with a very different approach or access to finance conditions, to technology, to skills, to primary materials, to innovation, because there are also global fights happening here. If we want to ensure a just transition, not only locally, and we have heard about this a lot, but also globally, then we need to be ready. The disruption goes so far that we are ready to not only question like the economic models and the economic monopoly and rules we have set up, but also trade and the local content. I mean, if we're really honest, the World Trade Organization's rules today do not allow for local content. And this means that the regulative framework with regard to this need to be changed. So I think that's one part that is really important. The other part that is important, and so I touched upon this a bit, is we speak about bringing energy policy and industrial policy together, but we also need to bring trade policy together. And I'll just build on this. How do we also accompany the energy consuming sectors to move to renewables? Take the example of transport here at the European level. The EU has decided to phase out the internal combustion engines by 2035. This is setting a very clear mandate and direction to the automotive industry. One of the big tensions in the discussion was that the global market is actually still asking for ICE. And so this is also where it is very clear that trade policies is fundamental. And then a last part, and I think we see it, we have a rush and a competition for talent. And that is something which needs to be strategically included, because the players everywhere need to basically be accompanied. And I think the private sector also, how to build this up. We need some agile approaches with regard to this to build it up, but we also need to understand that for companies, this is very disruptive. You see, if you need to move from 100 to 500 people, that's fundamentally disruptive. And I think those are discussions we're not having sufficiently in the global debates. And here, innovation and innovative approaches are also fundamental. And linking this to digitalization, for instance, is really important and will bring more global access also to same skilling and educational activities, etc.
So I will pick up on that talent issue, and in 1 minute, Celine, I will ask you what it means for a private company, for the private sector. Here we're seeing a boom, hopefully, in renewable energy development, what that means in terms of jobs and skills. But before I come over to you, I wanted to go over to Ramon to ask you about, we're talking about a just transition, trying to have a global or international just transition. Currently, you're working, if I understand correctly, on a regional just transitions, on learning from the Uruguayan experience and what can be exported or what can be learned in the rest of the Latin American context. So why don't you tell us how are you working in the rest of Latin America from that regional approach for a just transition?
Oh, just in a minute to resume a lot of work, but the most important point is we have identified what are the barriers for the transformation in the whole region. In total, we discovered 37 barriers. Much of them are important because we are not going as fast as we need in the region. And second, perhaps the most important point, we have done a guide to help countries to build their own roadmap. Mm-hmm. And this is what we're trying to work now on that. And this is, well, this is perhaps the most important thing that is going on right now in our region. We have, first of all, the political will is not that clear as it should be. And second, it's not really quite understood yet that, at least in the Latin American region, renewables are the cheapest way of producing energy, for sure, the electricity at least, for sure. And second, that yes, we can manage very high shares of intermittent energy even without any kind of storage, because just the combination of different sources is the answer. And just perhaps one extra minute concerning what Jose was saying, according to this link between local content, local manufacturing, and competitiveness, which is crucial. What we did in Uruguay, we didn't demand developers to have a local manufacturing, because this could be more expensive. But we prioritize projects where the local content was high. And in the bidding process, the private sector itself decided whether to have local, the share of local content, and we succeeded to have something like 60% of local content, not factoring totally, but up to 60% of local content, just because of the private sector had to find ways of having local developers, and this helped a lot. Because of this, we get those 4% of spillover of the economy. Thank you.
So I think that's several very, very interesting messages there. One, with those guides, with those clear targets to move towards, and that's, I think, something that different speakers have been mentioning. We can only work in a sort of cooperative way or a coordinated way if we know what the clear targets and what the common objectives are. And then the issue of linking local content with competitiveness. So leaving it up to business decisions of what the most efficient way of incorporating that local content is, which is quite interesting. So as I was saying earlier, Celine, and if you can also mention issues on local content, that would be very interesting as well. But I was very interested in the issue that RANA brought up earlier to do with talent and people. How do we build an energy transition? Are there enough people, are there enough skills to build the energy transition at the speed that we need? And how is the private sector going about it?
I think the answer is no, clearly. What Rana was saying, so moving from 100 people to 500 people, I think that's what ACU faced these last 15 years. We were five people in an office in Paris in 2007, and we are now almost 500. All around the world. That's a really big challenge. I think something that has been said by many other people here is innovation is key. So we need to be agile. We need to find solutions to help private actors like ACU grow in a good way with the skills that we need. That's really not an easy thing, but being innovative, trying to understand the local territories, I think that's key to be like a global actor at a local scale or stage. That's what we are trying to do. So the challenge is here. We do not have still all the keys to face it, but I think yes, innovation is key for that.
Thank you very much. I wanted to go over to Ali. There's a lot of issues that have been brought up. You mentioned earlier the local content opportunities. We've mentioned the solar power sector, for example, which is obviously going to be key in the Moroccan case. I know there's a lot of work happening around hydrogen as well in Morocco. So if you could tell us a bit more about those industrial integration opportunities that you are currently seeing in Morocco, and maybe what your big priorities are at the moment in this link between energy and industry.
Okay. So first, I completely agree with what has been said, is that I don't think that one country could achieve the industrial integration and develop further the local content without being part of a regional or continental dynamic. And I think that the more countries are joining this dynamic of renewable energy development, the larger will be the market, and then the easier will be to attract heavy industries or manufacturers to develop the local content and the industrial ecosystem. And this is also why Morocco has developed more than 20 bilateral agreements with African countries. And we are, for example, in the Sahel region, we are working with the African Development Bank as MASEN to develop national roadmaps by 2030 to develop renewable energy, but also a regional roadmap in order to ensure that there are synergies between the national roadmaps and there is room to have this industrial development between countries, but also synergies in terms of producing electricity in one area and selling it in other countries. It will help to create economies of scale. And besides this, so Morocco, our target by 2030 is also to have a minimum of 6 gigawatts of renewable energy. But it doesn't include all the additional needs that could come out from the e-mobility, for example, the desalinations, or the development of green hydrogen. If we get here and we sum all of this, we are talking about tens of gigawatts by 2030, 2040. So it gives a great visibility and to all the investors that are interested in setting some industries in Morocco. Also, the key advantage in Morocco is that we already have access with free trade agreements to 50 countries in the world, including European countries, US, Arab countries, etc. And beyond that, we are part of the African free trade zone, which will add an additional 50 countries. So the platform in Morocco is proposing very good infrastructure to be able to set up its factory and to export its finished products, but also to sell them in the national market and to have access to more than 100 countries in the coming year. So it gives also all the needed visibility to all investors to be able to set the factories. And I was meaning by factories upstream integration, meaning that all the inputs that are needed for the renewable energy. We don't have enough time, but there is also a big room for developing countries that are able to produce green electrons with a very competitive cost, to also attract heavy industries that are, for example, concerned by the CBAM tax in Europe, and that will increase their competitiveness by supplying green electrons with a very competitive cost and low cost from these countries, because the cost of moving green electrons or green molecules is that expensive that it's better in terms of competitiveness to be close to the areas of production of these green electrons.
So thank you very much, Ali. Our time is up, and I know some of our speakers have to run to other commitments. So just to wrap up in 15 seconds from my side, perhaps, I think we've heard, we started the conversation, we started the panel with some dilemmas, perhaps, international and regional competitiveness versus local content, what we have, industry and energy policy. And I think what we've seen in the panel, across the whole panel, is that in fact we're not talking about a dilemma, we're talking about things that work together. The experience, for example, from Morocco or Uruguay working not in a national but an international context with lots of links, the fact that sometimes closer is more competitive, making sure we get the right rules so we all know exactly what we're working towards geographically and from a chronological perspective. So I'd really like to thank all of our speakers participating today. I think the conclusions of today's panel will really add to some of the big themes we wanted to address in this Spiro conference. And if you will join me in thanking the speakers today for the session. Thank you.
La sesión ha finalizado. Os invitamos a seguir disfrutando del resto de actividades de Spirec y esperamos veros en este auditorio.
We hope to see you in this main auditorium for the closing session. Have a nice day and thank you very much.